Well, we have reached the 33rd day of the partial government shutdown, and nearly 1 million federal workers will now miss a second paycheck. Democrats and Republicans in the House and Senate will present separate bills aimed at ending the government shutdown tomorrow, but neither bill is expected to pass. Senate Republicans are designing their bill around President Trump's proposal, including funding for a border wall. But they would need 7 Democrats to sign on. Democrats want to reopen the government without funding the wall. Americans, though, want the president to compromise. According to a new CBS News poll, 71% say a border wall is not worth the shutdown, which is now the longest in history. Major Garrett has more on the shutdown's economic impact.
We are predominantly not a government-run economy. We're a free market economy.
True, but the president's top economist, Larry Kudlow, could not deny mounting financial worries, even inside the White House.
I have young people on my staff who are concerned, so I get that. I don't want to dance away from that.
The White House estimates the shutdown reduces economic growth by 0.13 percentage points each week, and that private economy turns in part on federal paychecks, the ones that have been missing for nearly a month.
How you doing, man?
Kazi Hassan, operations manager of the America's Best Wings chain in Maryland, has many restaurants located near government buildings.
Our clients, our regular customers, they're not showing up for the lunch break.
And while the White House says all will return to normal when the shutdown ends, small business owners across the country, like Robert Hoyt, may feel it longer.
We've had to let go 12 of our engineering staff, 12 good, hardworking engineers.
Hoyt's Seattle-based company, Tethers Unlimited, works with NASA and other federal agencies. Hoyt cut staffing by 20% because pending invoices sit unpaid on a furloughed bureaucrat's desk.
They were coworkers and friends to us. I expect it'll make it more challenging for us to bring in new employees.
Some agency leaders are privately fretting over a coming brain drain as high-skilled workers leave for the private sector, and shutdown anxiety drives away potential hires. But those fears have not been enough to forge a compromise.
Here, in the small business land, it feels like we're being held hostage.
So Major Garrett joins me now from the White House. Major, your story there really outlined the economic impact of this partial government shutdown. But I want to talk to you about just what lawmakers are doing to end this thing. We told people at the top of the hour that Republicans and Democrats are expected to consider 2 separate bills to end the shutdown. They're probably not going to go anywhere. They're probably not going to pass. We're hearing now about another proposal on the table that might include a pathway to getting a green card for DACA recipients. Is there anything out there that stands a chance of getting bipartisan support at this point?
Not at the moment, but what you just outlined, Anne-Marie, does suggest at least some small measure of progress in this sense. You can't have a compromise until you start having votes on something. And even though something may fail, at least people vote and express publicly what they're for and against. And after you do that, then you can discuss how to narrow those differences. So until you start voting, you really can't start building any sense of awareness publicly or privately about what's doable after you have the votes. So I know the votes aren't going to pass in the Senate, and those bills aren't going to advance, but they're at least going to demonstrate the relative political strength of both sides. And after that, they have to decide how to pursue compromise from that basis. Now, you mentioned this idea about green cards. What is that? That is permanent resident status. That has been suggested for weeks as a means by which to deal with those who are classified, at least in our nomenclature, as dreamers, brought here as children by their undocumented parents, grown up largely in the United States, know no other country. Some of them don't even speak the language of the country of origin for their undocumented parents, yet they face deportation. Green cards would give them permanent resident status. That's something Democrats may very well be interested in. But will the president endorse that? Will hardline immigration rejectionists, if you will, in the Republican Party accept that? Highly, highly unlikely. But one thing that's worth pointing out, when ideas start generating in an atmosphere where pressure is building, sometimes things that were not considered valid previously can take hold. I would say it's worth taking any idea thrown into the mix right now, if not seriously, at least as an expression of a desire to work this out. So, is it substantial progress? No. Does it suggest this is ending soon? No. But at least it's something.
Indeed. I mean, you can't go anywhere if you're not talking at all, and at least they're talking. I want to talk to you about this new CBS News poll, though, that says nearly 3/4 of Americans say that the border wall is actually not worth the shutdown. We spoke to Anthony Salvanto in our 7 o'clock hour, and, you know, he sort of talked about when you really drill down into the numbers, there's still a lot of bipartisan division about whether or not the wall is worth it. But I'm wondering if lawmakers are considering the public sentiment as they grind through their options.
Well, the president, by all apparent visible evidence, and that's kind of redundant, apparent and visible, forgive me for that, is not weighing public opinion at all, because the polls were negative at the beginning of the shutdown. They have gotten relentlessly more negative. Blame is being cast predominantly on the White House and on the president. And there is from our poll and other polling data, a separation from the president by most of the country on this central issue. Is this shutdown worth creation of some physical barrier on some segments of the southern border? Remember, the White House has even pulled back from that. The president said Saturday, in language that is not typical for him, hey, I'm not talking about a wall from sea to shining sea, 2,000 miles, just certain areas reinforced. He considers that backing away from some of his most aggressive rhetoric on that. And yet the country still isn't with him. But the president, again on Twitter this morning, and from Sarah Sanders, the press secretary, relentlessly focused on getting this money for this physical barrier and maintaining the shutdown in pursuit of that. So it isn't apparent that he is weighing or even considering the trajectory of polling data, which has gone more and more against him and this singular position on border wall funding. Even so, there are some signs that centrist Democrats in the House want to get this shutdown over and may be willing to budge a little bit more than Democratic leaders. What I can say is pressure is building beneath both sides, the White House and Democratic leaders in Congress. Sufficient to force a compromise? Not yet.
And before that happens, well, I don't know if it's going to happen before that happens, but hanging over this whole thing is the State of the Union address, right? Nancy Pelosi has asked the president to postpone it. At this point, it seems like the White House has no plans to postpone it at all. What are you hearing?
Same thing we've been hearing for days. The speech is being written. The expectation is it will be delivered. We just don't know where. Because, and this is a little civics lesson here, if the House of Representatives and the Senate, through the passage of what is usually a pro forma and very easy joint resolution, invites the president, there's no State of the Union at the United States Congress. It's a co-equal branch of government. The president just can't walk up to Congress, the House in particular, and say, I want to give a speech. That's the House's place. Have to be invited by the House of Representatives to come and give a speech. Now, constitutionally, the president is the president of the Senate. He could go to the Senate chamber and give a speech, but that venue is way too small. Never before had a State of the Union there. So the White House has been, for days, I've talked about this on CBSN a couple of times, thinking about the idea of a rally site, maybe somewhere outside of Washington, maybe the White House itself. So this is all just pressurization on the idea that the State of the Union matters and the president wants to deliver it. It is a sideshow, really, of the overall story, which is the shutdown. If the shutdown gets resolved, there'll be a State of the Union, and it will be at the House of Representatives, as it always is. If there isn't, it'll have to be someplace else.
Major, has anybody from the White House talked about just the awkwardness, if the shutdown continues, of having a State of the Union address in which, quite often what the president does is map out his successes thus far? To sort of say the State of the Union is XYZ, here's all the great things that I've done so far, oh, by the way, we're shut down.
Right. The State of the Union is strong. Wait a minute.
Right.
The government is shut down and the border is in crisis and weak. That's why there's a shutdown. So how strong is the nation? I mean, just that flourish that accompanies almost every State of the Union address. The State of the Union is what?
Exactly. Crickets.
Unraveling before our very eyes, and people are going without pay, and we are, as a nation, collectively hurting ourselves with partisan intent. Okay, what does that tell us about the overall strength of the Union? That is not just awkward rhetorically, it is in its own way a kind of, it would epitomize all of this dysfunction. Does the president really want to sit atop that dysfunction?
Yeah.
And there is every representation here, and it's probably a negotiating tactic. Sure, of course I want to do it. It's a big platform. I want to own it. Do you really? Stay tuned.
Stay tuned indeed. Major Garrett, thank you so much.
Thanks.